Imagine walking into a bishop's office, dropping a massive 1,000-page theological manuscript onto his desk with a giant thud, and saying, "Hey, I have the answers to all our problems. Oh, and by the way, I literally can't make rent this month." It's a pretty jarring scenario, right? But it actually perfectly captures a really profound intersection of canon law, pastoral care, and just basic human need. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a fascinating document that unpacks exactly how the Catholic Church is supposed to handle this very specific, very real situation. So, you drop the manuscript. What happens next? Does a huge stack of paper equal a guaranteed paycheck? How in the world does the church balance its organizational reality, limited budgets, formal structures, with its undeniable pastoral duty to care for a person who is clearly in distress? We're going to explore why the answer isn't just a simple yes or no, but actually a deeply structured process of discernment. Before we get into the nitty-gritty logistics, we need to set a spiritual baseline. The quote you're seeing, Resonare Christum, or to echo Christ, is the Episcopal motto of Bishop John J. Wright. This right here is the absolute guiding principle for how both bishops and the laity have to approach this dilemma. It's not about clever corporate maneuvering. It's about echoing Christ in both truth and charity. Here is our agenda for this explainer. 1. The bishop's dilemma. 2. Shepherds, not just CEOs. 3. The right to speak up. 4. Evaluating work and wealth. And 5. Lessons from church history. Let's get right into it. Section 1. The bishop's dilemma and finding the middle ground. When someone asks the church for patronage, human nature tends to make us jump to some pretty unhelpful extremes. On one side, you've got this myth that submitting a massive, sincere manuscript automatically guarantees you a cushy diocesan job or endless financial support. It absolutely does not. But on the exact opposite side is this idea that if a person lacks a formal title or some fancy academic pedigree, bureaucratic indifference is perfectly fine and the bishop can just ignore them. And actually, scratch that. That is completely false too. The source material gives us this fantastic analogy to make this concrete. Think of it like a student bringing a giant, super ambitious school improvement report to their principal while casually mentioning that their family at home is starving. Now, obviously the student isn't automatically going to be hired as the assistant supreme ruler of school improvement. That job doesn't exist. But the principal also can't just toss the report into a closet, make some important principal noises, and completely ignore the student's hunger. A responsible adult has to listen to the ideas and address the physical need. Moving on to Section 2, Shepherds, not just CEOs, focusing on the biblical office of the bishop. This entire dilemma is built on a core biblical framework. A bishop gets his authority directly from Christ to do 3 very specific things: teach, sanctify, and govern. He's a shepherd. He's a steward of the flock, not the absolute owner of a religious corporation. So when that manuscript lands on his desk, his job isn't to protect his own corporate turf. It's to guard the faith, coordinate gifts, and care for the people entrusted to him. And that leads us to this incredibly powerful quote from the text. The standard is not automatic patronage. It is responsible shepherding. Meaning, the bishop can't just credulously endorse every single unexamined project that crosses his desk, but he also can't dismiss a person in genuine need just because they don't fit into a standard administrative mold. Section 3. The right to speak up, looking at the laity's role in the church. Since laypeople are not just silent spectators sitting in the pews, we have to talk about charisms. A charism isn't just being naturally smart or being a really gifted writer. It's a specific spiritual gift given by the Holy Spirit meant for ecclesial service, literally for building up the church. And the Second Vatican Council teaches that pastors actually have a duty to judge the authenticity of these gifts rather than just extinguishing them out of fear or because they're unfamiliar. But look, handing over a manuscript isn't some Jedi mind trick. The faithful absolutely have the right, and sometimes even the duty, to speak up. But there are rules of engagement here. You have to do so with truthfulness, humility, and a real openness to correction. And practically speaking, you have to make the request manageable. You can't just drop thousands of pages on a desk and demand that the bishop bypass the church's brain. Provide an abstract, for crying out loud. Section 4. Evaluating work and wealth. This is the dual-track process. All right, this is where the rubber really meets the road. When that massive manuscript and the plea for rent money hit the bishop's desk at the exact same time, the church has to execute a dual-track solution. Why? Because frankly, hunger does not wait for peer review. You literally cannot tell someone facing eviction that you'll get back to them after a doctrinal committee meets next quarter. You have to acknowledge the person, separate the intellectual work from the physical need, handle the urgent charity immediately, and then arrange for a competent review of the text.
So the workflow literally splits into two. Track A is entirely focused on the theology. Is it orthodox? Is the author competent? Is it actually useful for the diocese? Meanwhile, Track B runs parallel. This track ensures the person gets directed to a food pantry, a rent assistance fund, or social services. And that happens completely regardless of whether the manuscript turns out to be a masterpiece or just a theological mess. But hey, what if the manuscript is the masterpiece and the church wants to use it? Well, Canon 231 steps in and demands fair remuneration. A diocese cannot exploit a person's devotion just to get free labor. Telling a highly qualified layperson, hey, this work is for God, is spiritually wonderful, but it literally does not pay the rent. Justice absolutely demands fair pay for ecclesial service.
Finally, Section 5, Lessons from Church History and How to Foster Authentic Gifts. If you think lay people pitching wild, ambitious ideas to the hierarchy is some new modern trend, history completely proves otherwise. I mean, Catherine of Siena wasn't a priest, but she wrote incredibly bold letters telling popes to be brave. Thomas More defended the faith from the secular world of lawn politics. Dorothy Day founded a massive social movement while maintaining deep, and yes, sometimes complicated, ties with bishops. All of these incredible lay voices faced delayed reception, deep misunderstanding, and long periods of discernment. Yet they persevered in communion with the church, rather than storming off to start rival institutions. We see the exact same dynamic with the great missionaries. Cyril and Methodius, Matteo Ricci, Roberto di Nobili, they all encountered massive resistance because their methods looked totally strange to European authorities. But unfamiliar terminology or weird methods don't automatically mean doctrinal error. True evangelization often requires translating the faith into entirely new cultural or intellectual languages. The church had to learn to listen before it judged. So, when the church does recognize a genuine gift, historical patronage proves that support doesn't always mean a permanent 9-to-5 diocesan desk job. Institutional support can take a ton of diverse forms: an introduction to a university, permission to publish, a temporary commission to write a specific report, or even just providing housing so a scholar has a safe place to continue their work. Let's circle back for a second to a really powerful reminder from Cardinal John Joseph Wright upon being named a cardinal in 1969. He states that ecclesiastical leaders possess a beautiful but very heavy burden to foster the intellectual life and social justice simultaneously. It's not an either-or situation. They are called to do both. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this thought to carry forward. Whether you are the one holding a bishop's staff or the one holding a 1,000-page manuscript, how are you echoing Christ in both truth and charity? How will you responsibly use your gifts, and who are you going to help along the way?